She thought she was just helping a hungry old man, until a convoy of military trucks pulled up and revealed the truth about his real identity. The neon sign outside Benny's diner flickered against the dark highway, casting a faint red glow across the parking lot. It wasn't much, just a rest stop along Interstate 65 in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where the coffee was strong, the pie homemade, and the floors creaked with every step. One of those small diners that never made headlines, barely changed, but always had a story to tell. If you look closely enough, Tasha Reynolds, 42, had been a part of this place for over a decade. Her uniform, a blue dress with a white apron, had long since become a second skin, just like the hum from the kitchen, the sizzle of the fryer, and the endless loop of country songs from a jukebox that barely worked. It was close to midnight, and the customers were thinning out. A couple of truckers sat at the counter, nodding over their coffee, while old Mr. Dobbs stirred his chili in the corner, just like he had every night for the past 5 years. A pair of high school kids giggled over a shared milkshake, sneaking glances at their phones. And then he appeared. She noticed him outside the window, near the entrance in the light of the street lamp. His coat hung loosely on him, as if it belonged to another man. The fabric was torn at the seams, his boots worn down, nearly falling apart. His hands, rough from years of hard labor, or maybe scarred by war, trembled slightly as he counted crumpled bills in his palm. She had seen him before, not often, but enough to remember, always nearby, always hesitating at the door, as if he had to summon the courage to enter each time, only to never go through with it. Some nights, he simply turned and walked away. Other nights, he stood just long enough to remind the world he still existed. Tonight, he pushed the door open. A cold draft swept through the diner, making the ceiling lights flicker. The bell above the door gave a tired ring. Tasha wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward him. "You coming in, or planning to let all the warm air out?" she asked lightly, but her eyes studied him carefully. The man hesitated, then stepped in slowly. I just want to have a look," he said in a rough, worn voice, as if it had traveled many roads and many years. "You can look from inside, too," she replied, motioning toward an empty booth. He hesitated again. His eyes flicked to the counter where the truckers sat, then back to the door, as if weighing whether he should leave after all. Tasha didn't give him the chance. She picked up a menu, walked past him, and placed it on the table by the window. "Sit down," she said simply. Slowly, he sank into the seat. His joints looked stiff, his shoulders tense, as if bracing for a blow. With careful hands, he reached for the menu. His fingers hovered over the cheapest item, the soup with a half sandwich. She saw the math in his eyes, the silent calculation, what he could afford and what he actually needed. "I'll just have the soup," he murmured, clearing his throat as if trying to sound more confident. "Potato soup, if you have any." Tasha didn't move. Instead, she leaned against the counter with crossed arms. "How about the sandwich, too?" He let out a dry chuckle. "Soup's enough." "Sure. But it's a slow night," she said with a shrug. "The kitchen needs to stay busy or they'll start bothering me." The lie rolled easily off her lips, and before he could protest, she called into the kitchen. "Hey, Lou, 1 potato soup and a turkey sandwich. Extra mustard." A man of few words gave her a short glance, nodded, and got to work. The old man, Walter Gaines, as she would later learn, folded his hands on the table, opened them again, then once more. "I'll pay you back," he said quietly, almost ashamed. Tasha waved it off. "Don't worry about it." "No, really," he insisted, his watery blue eyes eventually meeting hers. She just smiled. "Eat while it's hot." And in that moment, a single act of kindness set something in motion that no one could have ever predicted. Walter hesitated before reaching for the spoon. His rough, callous fingers hovered above the bowl, as if afraid that any touch might shatter the fragile dignity he had left. Tasha watched him from behind the counter, pretending to polish a glass that was already spotless. She recognized that look, the quiet, hidden pain of someone who wasn't used to accepting handouts. But maybe it wasn't just a bowl of soup. And maybe it wasn't a handout at all, she thought. She was just helping a hungry old man, until a convoy of military trucks pulled up and revealed the truth about his real identity. The neon sign in front of Benny's Diner flickered against the dark highway, casting a faint red glow over the parking lot. It wasn't much, just a roadside stop on Interstate 65 in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where the coffee was strong, the pie homemade, and the floors creaked with every step. One of those small diners that never made headlines, hardly ever changed, but always had a story to tell, if you looked close enough. Tasha Reynolds, 42, had been part of this place for more than a decade. Her uniform, a blue dress with a white apron, had long become a second skin, just like the hum from the kitchen, the sizzle of the fryer, and the endless loop of country songs. From a jukebox that barely worked anymore. It was nearly midnight, and the guests had dwindled. A couple of truckers sat at the counter, nodding over their coffee, while old Mr. Dobbs stirred his chili in the corner, the same way he had every night for the last 5 years. A few high school kids giggled over a shared milkshake, sneaking glances at their phones. And then he was there. She noticed him outside the window, near the entrance, under the street lamp's glow. His coat hung loosely off him, as if it belonged to another man. The fabric was torn at the seams, his boots worn down, almost falling apart. His hands were rough, marked by years of hard labor, or maybe by war, and trembled slightly as he counted the crumpled bills in his palm. She had seen him before. Not often, but often enough to remember. Always nearby, always hesitating at the door, as if he needed to muster the courage to enter, and never quite did. Some nights, he just turned around and walked away. Other nights, he stood just long enough to remind the world that he still existed. Tonight, he pushed the door open. A cold gust swept through the diner, making the ceiling lights flicker. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle. Tasha wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward him. "You coming in?" she asked lightly. "Or are you planning to let all the warm air out?" But her eyes watched him closely. The man hesitated, then stepped forward slowly. "I just want to take a look," he said with a rough, worn-out voice, like it had crossed many roads in years. "You can look from inside, too," she replied, nodding toward an empty booth. He hesitated again. His gaze flicked to the counter where the truckers sat, then back to the door, as if he was reconsidering, ready to leave. Tasha gave him no chance. She picked up a menu, walked past him, and laid it on the table by the window. "Have a seat," she said plainly. Slowly, he sank into the seat. His joints seemed stiff, his shoulders tense, as if he was bracing for something. With cautious hands, he reached for the menu. His fingers hovered over the cheapest item, the soup with half a sandwich. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the quiet math, what he could afford, and what he really needed. "I'll just take the soup," he murmured, clearing his throat, like he wanted to sound more sure. "Potato soup, if you have any." Tasha didn't move. Instead, she leaned against the counter with crossed arms. "How about the sandwich with it?" He gave a dry laugh. "Soup's already plenty, thanks." "But it's a quiet night," she said with a shrug. "Kitchen needs something to do. Otherwise, they start bothering me." The lie rolled off her tongue easily, and before he could argue, she called out to the kitchen. "Hey, Lou, 1 potato soup and a turkey sandwich, extra mustard." Lou, a man of few words, gave her a glance, nodded, and got to work. The old man, Walter Gaines, as she would later learn, clasped his hands on the table, opened them, then clasped them again. "I'll pay you back," he said quietly, almost ashamed. Tasha waved it off. "Don't worry about it." "No, really," he insisted. His watery blue eyes searched hers eventually. She just smiled. "As long as it's hot, that's all that matters." And right at that moment, a single act of kindness set something in motion that no one could have predicted. Walter hesitated before reaching for the spoon. His rough, callous fingers hovered above the bowl. as if afraid that any touch might shatter what little dignity he had left. Tasha watched him from the counter. She pretended to polish a glass that was already spotless. She recognized that look, the silent, hidden pain of someone not used to taking charity. But this wasn't charity. It was just soup. Or it wasn't just soup. It was a meal, and meals weren't charity. They were human. Lou slid the plate with the turkey sandwich across the counter, his face as unreadable as ever. Extra mustard, just like you said. Tasha took it and placed it in front of Walter before he could protest. He looked at it, a fleeting expression in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe something deeper. You didn't have to do this. It's already done, she interrupted, sliding into the booth across from him. No sense in letting good food go to waste. For a moment, he just sat there and stared at her as if trying to figure out the catch. There was none. Finally, he picked up the spoon and took the first bite. The diner around them continued like any other night. Truckers grumbling about gas prices. Mr. Dobbs suspiciously stirring his chili. The kids arguing over a jukebox song. But in that booth, something was happening. Walter ate slowly, deliberately, as if each bite had to last. He chewed the sandwich with mindfulness. Most people had forgotten. Between bites, he finally spoke. I used to stop here a lot. Tasha raised an eyebrow. Yeah, back when I was still driving, he said, nodding toward the window, as if looking through time. Long hauls, east coast of Texas, sometimes farther. She leaned back. Trucker? Not always, he muttered. Started driving after the war. That was the war. She didn't ask which one. She didn't have to. His face told her enough. Vietnam, maybe, or the Gulf War, but most likely Vietnam. The years were carved into his skin, in the wrinkles around his eyes, in the way his hands never truly stayed still, even when they did. She knew not to ask the wrong questions. People who had walked through hell didn't always want to talk about it, so she kept it simple. Why'd you stop driving? Walter laid down his spoon. A faint, bitter smile tugged at his lips. The body gives out before the will does. Tasha nodded. Yeah, I know that one. For a moment, silence rested between them. Not awkward, not heavy, just there. A kind of understanding that didn't need words. Walter finished his soup and folded his napkin neatly, like someone used to small routines. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against a few crumpled bills inside. She saw the hesitation in his face before he pulled them out. How much do I owe you? He asked. Tasha shook her head. Told you, it's on the house. Walter didn't like that. She could see it in the way his jaw tensed, how he shifted in his seat. I don't take charity, he said firmly. It's not charity, she said. It's a meal. He exhaled sharply, staring at the table. I'll pay you back. Don't worry about it, she said, getting up and taking his empty bowl. But Walter was persistent. One day, he said with emphasis. I promise. She smiled. All right, one day. He nodded, then slowly slid out of the booth, stiff like a man who had walked too many miles with too little rest. Before he left, their eyes met. Thank you, Miss Reynolds. She hadn't told him her last name, but before she could ask how he knew it, the bell over the door rang, and he was gone. What she didn't know was that one day would come, much sooner than she could ever have imagined. The next morning felt like any other. The sun crept lazily over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. Tasha had the early shift, pull down chairs, refill syrup dispensers, make sure the coffee was strong enough to keep the truckers awake another 100 miles. She hardly thought about Walter Gaines. People came and went constantly, some stuck in memory, most faded. He had seemed different, sure, but life went on. Until noon, the diner was packed. Plates clattered, conversations buzzed. A man at the counter was arguing with Lou about whether ketchup belonged on eggs. Tasha was refilling coffee when she heard it. Engines, not one or two, many. At first, It was just a faint vibration in the floor, making the salt shakers tremble. Then, through the diner's windows, she saw them. A convoy. 3, no, 4 military vehicles pulling into the lot. Large, serious-looking trucks. Not just a few National Guard guys stopping for lunch. These had official government plates. Dark tinted windows. Inside the diner, everything fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even Lou, who never looked up from his grill, turned his head slightly. Tasha's stomach clenched. The trucks came to a halt. Then the doors opened. Men stepped out, uniforms, boots, some in standard combat gear, others in more decorated uniforms. Officers. One of them, a tall man with sharp features and graying hair, adjusted his cap and stepped toward the entrance. The bell rang as he entered. No one moved. His gaze swept the room until it landed on Tasha. He walked toward her with the calm confidence of a man used to delivering important news, the kind of news that made people nervous. Miss Reynolds? Her throat went dry. She didn't like the sound of her name from his mouth. She forced herself to nod. That's me? The officer removed his cap. The silence stretched. The whole diner waited, eyes darting between them like a slow-motion tennis match. Miss Reynolds, he said again, firm but calm. Yesterday, you gave one of our men a meal. Tasha blinked. Excuse me, Walter Gaines. His expression didn't change. You gave him a meal. Her heart pounded. Yes, I did. The officer glanced back at the other men behind him, then returned his focus to her. You didn't know his story, he continued, but we do. A chill spread across the back of her neck. She looked past him to the trucks outside. Whatever this was, it was bigger than she had imagined. The other guests sat frozen, four to midair, coffee cups held tight. No one dared speak. Tasha exhaled slowly. Okay, she said, crossing her arms. Do you want to tell me what this is about? The officer studied her a moment, then gestured to the next booth. I think you should sit down. She had no idea that what he was about to tell her would change everything. She thought she knew. She felt her stomach tighten. She had spent years learning to read people. Truckers on their 5th cup of coffee. Salesmen with fake smiles. Teenagers trying to act older than they were. But this man, his face was unreadable. So instead, she leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I'm listening, she said. The officer glanced briefly at the other men before speaking. Walter Gaines isn't just a veteran, he said. He's a highly decorated war hero. Tasha's forehead creased. He didn't seem like the type to brag about that. The officer sighed softly, almost as if he had expected that response. He wouldn't, he said. That's just the kind of man he is. He paused. But there's more. A lot more. Tasha waited, watching him closely. The officer straightened, his voice steady. Walter served in Vietnam in the Special Forces. His unit was ambushed in 1971 during a covert operation. He was the only survivor. He held off an entire enemy wave long enough for an evacuation team to extract the wounded. He saved over a dozen lives that day. She blinked. The quiet, tired old man, who had counted his crumpled bills before entering the diner. This was the same person he was talking about? The officer continued. He was awarded the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and 2 Purple Hearts. But when he came home, it wasn't easy. Vietnam veterans weren't welcomed with open arms. He struggled, never spoke about what happened there. Eventually, he just disappeared. Tasha felt a lump in her throat. How long has he lived like that? Decades, the officer admitted. He worked when he could, lived where he could, never asked for help. Most people forgot his name. He tilted his head slightly. But you didn't. She shifted slightly under his gaze. I only gave him a meal. You gave him more than that, said the officer. You showed him kindness when no one else did. Tasha glanced toward the window, where the military trucks stood like silent sentinels. Dozens of questions raced through her mind, but one burned the brightest. Why are you here? She asked. Why now? The officer hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Walter disappeared from our records years ago. He never claimed the benefits he earned, never reached out to people who owed him more than they could ever repay. We didn't know where he was until yesterday. Tasha frowned. How did you find him? The officer's expression softened slightly. He made a call. She froze. What? He nodded. After leaving your diner, he found a payphone and dialed a number. He hadn't called in over 30 years. His voice grew quieter. He said he wanted to come home. Something tightened in her chest. Walter Gaines, the man who had walked into Benny's diner the night before, wasn't just a hungry old man. He was a man who had made a decision, perhaps the hardest one in his life. He didn't tell me, she murmured. The officer shook his head gently. He wouldn't. She exhaled and ran a hand through her hair. What happens now? That depends, said the officer. Walter asked to see you. Her eyebrows shot up. Me? The officer nodded. He said if it weren't for you, he wouldn't have made that call. Tasha stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up. She had known Walter for a single meal, one conversation, and now she was at the center of something far bigger than herself. She glanced at the booths, at the patrons pretending not to listen, then looked back at the officer. Where is he? The officer motioned to the door. He's waiting outside. And in that moment, Tasha realized this wasn't just Walter's story anymore. It was hers too. Tasha hesitated. Her pulse quickened. Outside, the heavy military trucks sat in the lot, their presence surreal against the backdrop of the small roadside diner. The guests were quiet, waiting to see what she'd do. Even Lou had stopped pretending to clean the grill. She swallowed hard. All right, she said finally. Let's go. The officer gave a short nod and walked to the door. Tasha followed, her heart pounding in her ears. As soon as she stepped outside, the cool midday air hit her face and cleared the fog in her mind. And there he was. Walter Gaines sat on the open tailgate of the nearest military truck, a woolen Army-issued blanket draped over his narrow shoulders. Up close, he looked even older. The deep lines on his face told 1,000 stories she would never hear. His hands rested in his lap, his fingers tracing invisible patterns in the fabric. When he saw her, he sat up straighter. Tasha forced a smile. I didn't think I'd see you again so soon. Walter let out a dry chuckle. I didn't think I'd be seen again at all. She crossed her arms, glancing at the uniformed men nearby. What is all this really about? Walter's eyes softened. I made a call, he said, his voice quieter now, as if he could barely believe it himself. Told him I was ready. Ready for what? She asked. To stop running. The words fell heavy between them. Walter inhaled slowly. I spent too many years pretending. I didn't need help. Thought if I stayed invisible, I wouldn't be a burden to anyone. But you, he shook his head. You reminded me there are still people who care. That maybe I have more ahead of me than just waiting for the end. Tasha felt something tighten in her chest again. She hadn't had a grand plan when she paid for his meal. She hadn't thought she would change a life. She just saw a man who was hungry and did what any decent person would do. But sometimes the smallest things hit the hardest. Walter glanced at the officer, then back at her. They're offering me a place to live, a chance to get back on my feet. And I want that. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. But I asked him to find you first, because there's something I need to know. Tasha raised an eyebrow. What is it? Walter gripped the edge of the blanket with his fingers. Do you believe in second chances? She took a deep breath. Yes, Walter, I do. He nodded, pressed his lips together, and then, with trembling fingers, pulled a folded envelope from the pocket of his coat. I want you to have this, he said. Tasca furrowed her brow. What is it? Walter handed it to her. She hesitated before unfolding the paper. The handwriting was neat, but old, as if someone had written it with careful deliberation. It was a letter dated from the year 1972. addressed to Walter Gaines. She looked up, confusion on her face. I don't understand. Walter's voice was barely more than a whisper. It's my last letter home. I never sent it. Tasca's stomach twisted. He swallowed. I wrote it after that mission. I didn't think I'd make it back. But I did. And once I was home, I couldn't bring myself to send it. She stared at him. Why not? Walter looked past her, his gaze distant. Because I didn't feel like the man who had written it anymore. Silence stretched between them. Slowly, Tasca unfolded the letter. Her fingers brushed over the written words. She didn't read it. Not yet. This wasn't something to rush. Walter shifted, his expression unreadable. If you believe in second chances, he said quietly, maybe you could help me send it now. Tasca's throat tightened. To whom? Walter took a deep breath. My daughter. The words hit her like a blow. Tasca's breath caught. Your daughter? Walter nodded. I haven't seen her since she was a baby. Left before I could even hold her. I was too much of a coward to find out. If she'd ever want to know me. Tasca clutched the letter tighter. She didn't know what she had expected when she stepped outside earlier, but certainly not this. And now, she had a decision to make. Her fingers curled around the paper, which felt heavier than its actual weight. She had left the diner, hoping for an explanation, maybe even a simple thank you. Instead, she stood in front of a man who had carried a burden for decades that no one could see. A daughter. Walter had a daughter. Tasca looked up. His face remained calm, but his hands trembled slightly on his lap. This was not just a letter. It was a bridge. One final attempt to reach someone he had lost before he ever truly had her. Tasca exhaled slowly. Are you sure? Walter blew the air through his nose. His jaw tightened. I don't know if she wants to hear from me, but I owe it to her to try. The officers standing nearby kept their distance. This moment didn't belong to them. Tasca hesitated, then looked again at the envelope. The edges were yellowed, but the ink was dark and strong. The words inside had remained sealed for over 50 years. What's her name? She asked. Walter swallowed. Angela Porta. Tasca raised an eyebrow in surprise. Porta? She took her mother's name. Walter nodded and rubbed his hands together. She didn't want anything to do with mine. His voice was rough, tinged with something he had long buried deep inside. Regret. I had barely left the military. When I walked out on her mother, Marcy tried to hold on to me, but I pushed her away, thought I was doing them a favor. Tasca studied him. And now, Walter let out a dry, humorless laugh. Now I'm a tired old fool, who's realized running away solves nothing. Tasca sighed and shook her head. You waited a long time. He met her eyes. I guess it took me just as long to understand what really matters. Tasca bit the inside of her cheek, then exhaled sharply. All right. Walter blinked. All right. She carefully folded the letter and tucked it into the pocket of her apron. I'll find her. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe even disbelief. You do that? Tasca crossed her arms. I don't know what she'll say. I don't even know if she'll read the letter. But if you're really serious, I'll do what I can. Walter swallowed hard. I don't deserve it. No. She cut him off. I'm not letting you say that. It's not about what you deserve or don't deserve. That's up to Angela. I'm just making sure she gets this letter. For the first time since she had met him, Walter looked lighter, like a man who had finally put down a suitcase he had carried far too long. An officer stepped closer. Walter, it's time to go. Walter nodded slowly and looked at Tasca one last time. If she wants nothing to do with me. His voice was barely audible. Don't let it weigh on you. Tasca chuckled softly. I'm a waitress, Walter. You think I'm not used to people yelling at me? A tired smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Probably right. She extended her hand. Take care of yourself, Walter. He hesitated, then took her hand in both of his. His grip was weak but firm. Thank you, Miss Reynolds, he said quietly. Tasca just nodded. Then Walter turned and climbed into the truck. The doors slammed shut. Engines roared. She stood there and watched as the convoy disappeared into the distance, leaving behind a cloud of dust. The letter in her pocket suddenly felt heavier than anything else. She had no idea what Angela Porter would say when she found her, but she would find out. Tasca sat in her car. The engine was off. The diner's parking lot was nearly empty. The military convoy was long gone. She looked at the address on the envelope. Another time, another life, Montgomery, Alabama. But people didn't always stay in one place. Angela Porter could be anywhere. Tasca exhaled slowly. She wasn't a detective. She wasn't a messenger of fate. She was just a waitress who had been in the right place at the right time. But sometimes that was enough. She pulled out her phone and started searching. It didn't take long. Angela Porter, 54 years old, Mobile, Alabama. Tasca stared at the screen. What the hell was she supposed to say? Hey, Angela, I'm Tasca. You don't know me, but I served your father a turkey sandwich, and now I have a 50-year-old letter for you. Yeah, that would go over well. She sighed and gripped the steering wheel. There was no perfect way to do this, so she did what she did best. She picked up the phone and dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, hello, the voice of a woman, firm but cautious. Tasca swallowed. Hello, is this Angela Porter? Silence. Who's asking? Tasca gripped the letter on her lap. My name is Tasca Reynolds. She took a deep breath, forced herself to continue. I recently met someone, a man named Walter Gaines. Silence again, then a sharp intake of breath. Tasca continued. He asked me to find you. He wanted you to have something. Silence. Long, heavy, uncertain. Then, softly, my father is dead. Tasca felt her throat tighten. No, ma'am. He's alive. A quiet tremble in the voice on the other end. That can't be. Tasca closed her eyes for a moment. I know this is a lot, but he's alive, and he gave me this letter for you. Angela was quiet. Then, softly, where are you? Tasca hesitated. Bowling Green, Kentucky. Angela exhaled audibly, uncertain, shaky. I need a moment. Tasca nodded, even though Angela couldn't see her. Take all the time you need. Then the line went dead, but that was okay. Some things couldn't be fixed. Some wounds never fully healed. But maybe, just maybe, this was a beginning.